And welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ann Ayers. I have the honor of being the lead on the Community Plus Values Initiative here at the University of Denver. And we're excited to have this group here today to talk about resilience. I don't know about the rest of you, but it's getting a little exhausting this year that we call 2020. And it seems to be doing that over and over again to us. And so how do we kind of keep our head above water, and how do we keep moving forward and actually doing the hard work that 2020 is calling us to do on so many fronts, from our work to social justice to just personally kind of keeping it together at home and supporting our family and friends. So we have some people here today who are going to be terrific in talking about this. Before I introduce them, and I want to remind you that we have closed captioning available. So you should have at the bottom of your screen the ability to click on a closed caption option, and that should bring up the captioning for you. And then also, we're doing these over the summer just every other Thursday. So we had been doing them every single Thursday, but we'll do them every other Thursday. Next week, we're also or 2 weeks from today, we'll talk about resilience again with some folks from the Graduate School for Professional Psychology. So we'll hope that you'll join us then as well. Community Plus Values is an initiative to really create a sense of belonging and to give folks what they need in a very sort of holistic way at the University of Denver, to remind us that we're not just here because of our work, but we're here because we believe in a common mission and that we all want to feel like we belong to that and belong to this family. So we hope that we're hitting the mark. Please let us know if there are other topics you want us to chat about. We're happy to do that. So I'm thrilled today to have Melissa Kutcher-Rinehart with us, who is our head coach for our award-winning gymnastics rockstar team. And you've been here for, let's see, you're going into your 23rd year?
Yeah, and you have to say that. No, teasing you.
She started when she was 4, and was awesome. So, and we are both moms of twins. Also, so we share that in common, and just kind of knowing about being a working parent, but also coaching these young women through all that you do, and how do you come back from a loss, and how do you stay in there for a long season and for a long career. So we're really thrilled to have you here, and congratulations on all of the success you've had. I think like 21 appearances at the regional finals, is that right? And then also, of course, you were in the finals in 2019 with our team. So just awesome.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, we're so excited. And Chase McNamee, who's here, and it's fun. I feel like, especially in academia, my colleagues turn out to be sort of onions. You learn more and more about their backgrounds as you get to know them. And Chase, of course, joined us just a few months ago as a senior project leader in the Chancellor's office. He also has a background in counseling, and in pursuing his doctoral work in higher education, has had an opportunity to work as a counselor in many different forms, and so can bring sort of that perspective to us. So thank you, Chase, for being here and wearing your other hat today.
I was going to say, also, I'm a twin, so it's a twin life thing today. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Dill Khan, who is here with us and is going to do our interviewing, is one of the graduate fellows who's working on the Community Plus Values with us, and has been doing some extraordinary story gathering and helping us just raise the right voices right now. So thank you so much, Dill, for your work. She is going into her 2nd year of graduate work in our School of Media, Film, and Journalism, and is pursuing a degree in media and public communications. So nobody better to do this interview. So I'm going to let them all chat, and we will come in at the second half of this and give voice to some of your questions. Feel free to post them in the Q&A, or also post them in the chat, and we'd love to hear from you. So with that, I'll say, have fun.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you, Chase and Melissa, for joining today. It's also odd, I'm also a twin, so I'm not really sure what's going on here.
I just learned that about you, Dale. Whoa.
We all have that in common. We're related to twins, and we have a twin. I want to start off by getting to know a little bit more about you two and the work that you do. And if you're comfortable, I would like to know how you're each doing and how you're coping in this time of a global crisis and a racial crisis and everything that seems to be piling on this year. Kind of crazy to think it's already July of 2020. But yeah, please take it away.
Okay, I'd be happy to go. One, I'm going to break the streak here for a moment. I actually don't have twins, but mine are 18 months apart. So for all, I feel like they're twins. So it's okay. I'm going to put myself in that category, even if I'm not. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. As mentioned, I'm the head women's gymnastics coach at the University of Denver here. And I'm doing all right. So thank you for asking. You know, it's been definitely challenging times, but, you know, as I've been thinking about this call and the talk about resiliency, and I tend to use the word grit a lot, and I know they're different, but there's some, you know, definitely crossover meaning and component, and we do a lot of work on our team in regards to culture and character and grit and resiliency. So super happy to be here. Excuse me and forgive me for reading a little bit, but it's kind of maybe a bit easier for me to make sure that I'm hitting on some kind of the talking points of how we're doing now as an opportunity, as a team. I really feel personally, this has been, you know, you have to find the silver linings where you can. And these times have been an opportunity, I feel, for growth and for learning. And so that has been something that has kept me personally motivated and inspired through this time, and building that resiliency is really thinking through what kind of planning can we do? What kind of strategic planning can we do? What kind of planning with our team can we do? So we've done some great things to be able to reflect on this time and use some of this, hopefully down the road, wisdom from experience that we're getting in terms of leadership, in terms of reading. And so, you know, just really putting an effort in there for that growth mindset piece to build that resiliency. And personally, I have had really some great walks in nature. And that nature component has actually helped me with some spirituality and breathing and meditation. And then time that we all didn't maybe have, you know, on the hamster wheel of life we were on before this period took place. So enjoying a little bit more of the family time. But really, I think what's kept me motivated is building out a spring curriculum for our Denver gymnastics team, for, you know, focusing on short-term goal planning and all the things that we can control, and not putting our efforts where we can't, things we can't control. So thank you for asking.
Awesome. I just want to say again, I'm just honored to be in this space with all of you. It's just been so great to be a part of C+V. And I think it's important for me first, as we do open up the space, I do want to acknowledge that my pronouns are he, him, his, and I do identify as a white, straight, cis male. And I think that I like to open up the space in that way just for me, because I do have a lot of privileges and I benefit from a lot of the privileges, and definitely a different experience than a lot of folks who are going through much, much more from both a racial justice lens and from a COVID lens, and the experiences that they've been going through. So I want to honor their experiences, because I know that I have that privilege at times to lean in and lean out sometimes when it's convenient. And I'm just thankful to this community and community at Teachers College, at Columbia University, and my friends and family to kind of keep me accountable. And that's been something throughout all of this, is to try to remind me of this. And it's been a privilege to work with C+V in that way, because I think it's helped me grow as an individual to think about these things and what that looks like to do this programming. So I just wanted to start with that. And the other part is that it is an overwhelming time. Like, it is so hard right now with everything going on. And it just feels like it's summertime and this should be ending, and it's not. It's kind of feels like sometimes it's just getting started in a lot of ways. And there's so many layers of different things and how COVID has affected different populations, particularly populations of color. And so just been thinking a lot about that, and how I can kind of take action in those steps, but absolutely feeling some overwhelming feelings, some anxiety, also positivity in the sense of I do see people showing up for each other. I do see people being there for one another, and honestly, a little bit more authenticity throughout all of this. I think we were joking about Zoom calls and how family members jump in and jump out. And I think we're just getting to know each other more on a personal level. And so I think there's kind of this like experience of, it don't want to go into a good, bad paradigm, but it just feels like there's different moments where it feels like, I don't know if we'll make it through this, and then other moments where I do feel uplifted. So there's a balance there for sure right now for me. But thanks so much for having me on here, everybody. I appreciate it.
I had a quick follow-up question actually, because I've just simply curious to learn how the two of you have been coping during this time. I know that you spoke about there being silver linings, which I've personally found as well during this crisis, but during your pockets of time, whether it's during your day or during the week, what do you do to take care of yourself? If you don't mind sharing, I'm simply curious, and I could use some tips on how to take care of yourself and what self-care looks like during a time of crisis.
Chase, do you want to answer first?
Sure, I can jump in. Yeah, I was just kind of thinking about that as we were prepping for this. And one of the things that I always talked about in my counseling program and with folks is that idea of relationships. And in a way, my parents, I grew up on a farm and ranch in Wyoming. We actually did not have internet until just about a year or two ago. It's still pretty spotty, but we've actually been able to stay in closer touch via video calls because they've learned how to do video calls. My mom is a teacher and started doing Google Meets. And so we've been able to video chat with my parents. We've been able to do game nights with my friends all across the country, actually. We had game nights with those in New York and my good friends from there. And so I think that has been the biggest thing for me is that I stay really, really close with my partner and wife, Megan, and our dogs, Ollie and Cora. And so anything to just remind me that there are moments where we have these relationships and it's just, we can be together and just, enjoy conversation, enjoy a game night. And so it's kind of been cool in that way to maintain those relationships almost on an even closer level because it reminds us of all the things in life that are important kind of right now, and kind of some other things have fallen back that maybe don't feel as important right now. That's been a big help for me. And then being in nature, I totally agree with Melissa that we've gone hiking and we are very lucky to have that space to do that. So that's been something that's really helpful for me. And the last thing I would say is that I had a really phenomenal professor, Dr. Jane Warren, who always reminded us that life is like full of waves. And so this is a wave that it feels like you're never going to be out of this, but it will go up and down. And so just trying to stay grounded in the moment of talking to folks and sharing my experiences and realizing this is not permanent. There will be change and we will come out of this. I have to remember that.
Yeah. I would echo everything Chase just said. And, obviously for self-care, I feel like also reminding myself of, Joseph Campbell is someone who I really love, A Hero's Journey, and reminding us that this is all an adventure that we're on. And, how do our thoughts and actions and feelings and beliefs, especially this time, and re-examining that and growing and learning through that and really realizing that we all do have truly our own hero's journey till the other side is a form for me of self-care. And so I would also say yes. And, for our athletes, our student athletes, exercise is such a great form of self-care. And I don't think we can forget that. You don't have to be a triathlete, you don't have to be in a triathlon, but even walking, like I have found just walking right now and the peace and the quiet of that, and being accepting of where your thoughts go and not judging those thoughts, I think is a really also important part of self-care. And, we talk about on our team as everyone is going, and what's Chase just mentioned, everyone's going to have different thoughts at different times. And it is going to, ebb and flow, and maybe being okay with that, acknowledging that, and not, being hard on yourself about that. There are times you're probably going to be okay, and then times maybe not so much. And I think that to me feels completely normal. So again, spending time with my family, and I love to read, and I love to listen to podcasts and TED Talks. And so this has been an opportunity for me to grow as a leader. And that's also a form of self-care. How can I improve myself and make it feel like I'm doing something productive, not just for our university, our community, but for society, for my own self-growth as a parent, as a wife, as a coach and a mentor and a teacher. And then I just want to also go back, if it's okay for a second, Dylan, and just say that I really do echo what Chase said. You know, our thoughts and prayers really do go out to everyone in the world who is suffering. And, you know, we do realize how this is such a difficult time. And I really do also appreciate, that's why I appreciate being on this call so much. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate you both, you know, being willing to share. So given your work, how would you define resiliency? We all know that there are many definitions of resiliency, and that might look different for everyone. But how would you define it, and what does that look like in a university setting?
Chase, do you want me to go ahead and go? So please still cut me off when it's time. I certainly don't want to monopolize it, and I want Chase and to have the time, because I think it's so good to bounce ideas and thoughts off each other. You know, this is one of the things I love about during this time about resiliency in terms of athletics. And to me, this is the value of sport in society. And it doesn't have to be varsity athletics, but it can be recreation, it can be club sports, it can be, you know, whatever. But getting out there and learning how to fail and being okay with failure, and then having to pick yourself back up and try again. And that's something that you can learn in many different areas. It doesn't have to be just athletics. You know, certainly you can do that with music. You can do that with lots of things. But I certainly feel the value of athletics and sport in our society, which has been hard right now. I think to some of us who live and breathe and love sports in general, and not having that right now has certainly been a challenge. But it's also been a reminder to me how fortunate and blessed I have been. And, you know, even though it's incredibly difficult to fail, but the true resiliency you build from failure can't be underestimated. And so it's really interesting, because I was mentioning to Chase before we got on this call that we have done a few exercises on our team with resiliency. And so I'd be happy to give my email out to anyone who's interested, and certainly can post some of the podcasts and TED Talks and books that some of what our student athletes are quoting, or some of what they're saying, because we don't have the time for me to quote and cite every single reference. But it might be interesting if you would want to hear a little bit of what some of the student athletes say in this exercise about resiliency, and in terms of how they're interpreting it. So I'd be happy to read you just a little bit of it. Without being anonymous. And I want to mention that I did ask the team if it was okay if I read some of their information, and that they'd be comfortable with that, and they said yes. But I think it's just phenomenal to see how the students in general and student athletes are dealing and coping and recognizing what does resiliency mean to them. And so we had thoughts like this: it takes resiliency to recognize the fact that you are not alone. And so I think that that's such an important part of what we're doing. Other comments and thoughts range from hunt the good stuff, which was from a podcast. And I think that's so interesting. We all tend to know there's plenty of bad and negative stuff, but are we willing to quote unquote hunt for the good stuff? Is what I'm doing helping me or hurting me? I thought that that was kind of an interesting thought about resilient people are really good at choosing where they select their attention. They have a habit of realistically appraising the situation and typically managing to focus on things that they can change and somehow accept the things they can't, which I think we've kind of talked about. You know, really, can we focus on the things we can control and not the things we can't? And one of my athletes was talking about how this is a struggle for her, that she tends to be a perfectionist. And so how can she put aside some of that perfectionist to really increase her resiliency? And I thought she was saying tune into the good was a really another interesting way of saying, like, try to being optimistic and hunt for the positivity and the silver linings. Another one of the athletes said her personal view on resiliency before watching one of the TED Talks or podcasts we're talking about is resiliency is being able to mentally and physically come back or overcome past difficulties. And that they really have this mindset that if they can get through this, they will be stronger on the other side. And so I'm sticking to that. And then the last couple were just positively focusing on what we can change and accept and what we can't, your internal locus of control. Without resiliency, none of the other values we talk about as a team will persist when adversity strikes, which is inevitable. Resiliency is the root of the tree, and it is a huge part of what makes up our individual and collective character. My personal resiliency takeaway is that resiliency is a choice, and I can increase my resiliency by leaning into every challenge and seeing it as an opportunity. So I thought that that was kind of interesting. And then the last one from my athletes again was, I can increase my personal resiliency by continuing to accept that suffering is part of the human existence. And I can also spend time being present and mindful of what actions are potentially going to help me and harm me. So I just thought that those were a few interesting things in terms of how our athletes either saw resiliency, defined resiliency, or how they thought they can bring more resiliency into their own life.
Yeah, I love those answers. That is exactly what I was thinking. And I love the idea of it's a practice. Resiliency is a practice where I read a really cool piece on the American Psychological Association about resiliency that says it's like flexing a muscle, and you grow the more you practice your resiliency. But the one thing I always think about and kind of harken back to the lessons that like my professors and folks in my life have taught me is that resiliency shouldn't be confused with the positivity movement, which is everything should be positive all the time, and you have to think of the silver linings and just be a positive person, which is honestly so hard and I think impossible to do. Resiliency, Melissa said it perfectly, and the student athletes, is that there will be good, there will be bad, there will be moments where you think, I have no idea how I feel about that, but it's kind of thinking about how do I learn from those moments. And I always try to be as transparent as possible in any conversations with my team. And I struggle with really, really bad anxiety, and really try to think about what is my anxiety telling me right now. And so I think that's part of resiliency, is what is this situation trying to tell me right now? Is there anything that I can come out of this with, something that I can learn? Are there things that I learned that I don't want to go through anymore, and maybe take myself out of a situation that doesn't feel okay to me? And so I think it's really a big part for me to think about that with resiliency, is that idea that it's neither good nor bad, but it's an experience that they were going through. And I love that part that the student athletes spoke about so much, is how they can learn from those moments. And so that's kind of where my definition falls. But I just always encourage with that, is that resiliency involves a bravery in talking about what's both hurting and what feels good in those moments, and what might trigger you, what might lead to a visceral reaction, and all of those pieces are critical components of resiliency. And it's not just about positivity, but it's about kind of learning and being able to press onward, knowing that you have the supportive relationships and those who might be your supervisors or those who are in your life, things like that.
Melissa, when you mentioned your student saying that they hunt for the good stuff, I had to like take a moment and pause, because that's so prevalent to my life right now. That's what I've been doing since the summer started. I've been actively hunting for the good stuff, and I've done everything I could to avoid the news. And I know that's not a good thing. Obviously, you need to keep yourself informed. But I've been trying to practice that, because I think this is a shared experience. I've been overwhelmed with fatigue and just this sense of helplessness of like, there's so much going on in the world, and I feel like I can't do anything as one individual. And it also gives me a moment where I realize how privileged I am, because I'm incredibly privileged. And then I think about next year, and I think about how different it's going to look than, my first year of graduate school. No one ever saw this coming. So sort of transition into the next question. As we all sort of start to reimagine what our upcoming fall quarter is going to look like, we know it'll be very different. How do we begin to have these conversations that focus on building and supporting student, faculty, and staff resiliency?
Chase, would you like
to
go?
Go ahead, Melissa. Okay. Nope.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I might not be answering it exactly directly, Dill, but I think this is the great part of being like on this kind of webinar is the fact to bounce ideas and just also say thoughts about things. And I just really like what you said, Chase, too, about the bravery piece. And, you know, it made me think of Brene Brown. And, you know, I think just sometimes it's so interesting that we see things so black and white, and we don't realize you can be scared and brave at the same time, right? And we can all have different feelings going on at the same time right now. And so I think that that's a, you know, really important point of what's going on. And it is going to be interesting. This is certainly continues to be an evolving situation. And I think that's why there's such a struggle too. If it was like an end goal and people exactly knew this is going to end at this time, in this place, in this way, and we're all going to resume whatever that new normal is, but there isn't, and it continues to change and evolve. And so I think we're really going to have to be, you know, compassionate to ourselves and to others. We're going to have to understand that this is constantly changing. And to, again, not completely answer your questions, but I also wrote down a few other things, I hope it's okay, that our team and athletes were talking about. And I thought some of these comments were also relevant to sort of your question indirectly about how are we navigating this new fall and what is this going to look like? And they, you know, they were really talking about how do we react to failure? You know, how do we react to, and again, we don't have the answers, but how do we react to this ever-changing situation? And that they really felt like optimism was the key, but I completely agree with you, Chase. There's such a difference in, you know, being positive for the sake of positive. You have to be realistic. There are challenges, and this is part of the human existence, but I thought that they were really feeling like optimism was a key, and that these setbacks would be inevitable, and that the more you can learn about yourself and grow as a person, and this is an opportunity to do that. So how does that come into the DU community from our students, for our staff? How do we take these opportunities and learn and grow for them? How do we build relationships? And then I think one of the, you know, most interesting things is, and this will be interesting to see, this is, I am not a professor in academia, so this is easy for me to say, but, you know, in our own little world, really, what's our why? What is our purpose? And what are our values, shared team values, collective, and, you know, our individual values? And if there is a way, I feel like sometimes, and I'm, again, not the expert, so please, these are just my random thoughts, not being an expert, but I feel like sometimes it's easier to navigate these difficulties with the challenges ahead of us if we do know our purpose, and we do know our vision, we do know our why. And I think remembering that why is going to be so important to decision making and to navigating those difficult times. So I know as a team, we have a lot of conversations about what is our why, what is our purpose, what do we want, how do we want to come out of this experience stronger on the other side. And so if there's a, you know, a way to do that collectively in a bigger community setting, I think that would be really valuable.
No, I love that. I think the why is so important because it just, like you said, it keeps us moving when we feel like we're kind of stuck and we just don't know, you know, what to do in those moments. And I also love what you were talking about with Melissa, with the team and individual. And that's where my mind always goes to is on an individual level and an organizational level and then a societal level. So there's a framework that the higher and post-secondary education program at Teachers College uses that focuses on those three concentric circles. And so that always helps me frame these conversations and how I kind of go about this work to think about resiliency, because it feels a little bit more doable on an individual level, but then you start thinking like institutional and societal and what does that look like? Yeah, so the things that I would say from an individual level, and this has been modeled to me by so many wonderful supervisors over the years, is to be okay with being transparent and authentic and genuine in your interactions with fellow staff and your supervisors, and just to say, I don't feel okay right now. I feel exhausted. I'm feeling really good today. We're the we are the people who always say, we're fine, everything's good. That's very much an American society thing. And I think now more than ever, it's important to say, like, today I just don't feel well. I don't feel okay. I'm having a visceral reaction, you know, in my shoulders, or I need to go to the doctor, or anything like that. And just being okay with having that courage. And I think that's a huge component of resiliency and coping, is just being willing to do that. And I do think from a supervisor side, or if you do oversee folks, or like Melissa mentioned as a coach, is just always checking in with people and just saying, like, how are you doing and how are you actually doing? And so I think that's a big part, is inviting those conversations, because I think part of our culture has been built around kind of that idea of you don't want to show weakness, or that resiliency should be not about showing weakness, but it is about being fully transparent. And there's a lot of courage with that. And then my other kind of side goes to more of the organizational level and institution of, I think that's the value of community plus values, and the work that ODEI and athletics and iRise and, you know, DU dialogues and IE and all these different groups on campus and faculty members and the programs that they put on, are that they're all around this idea of coming together in a community and talking to each other and just being together in that community. And so I think that's where it's important as an institution, and we talk about values in C+V, is that I loved in our conversation with April and Levita was about values is a great point. And I loved what Melissa brought up about that shared values and the why, is because I think that gives us a way to have a jumping off point as a community of, how are you doing? One of our values is checking in with people and caring about each other in the community and truly saying, no, how are you doing? And so I think that's a big part for me as I think about planning programming and institutional wide initiatives, is in the end, what is our why, and what is the work that we're trying to do, and how do we make sure that we bring in different voices to the table, and that we honor different experiences and identities and backgrounds and culture, because each person's going to experience these things differently. And so I think that's where, as an institution, we can really focus on resilience and helping each other cope by honoring those different experiences and really being willing to just listen and understand and learn. And I think that's a huge part of resilience and that personal relationship building. And then from a societal level, I always think about, you know, what are you doing to kind of figure out your why and a larger purpose of, are you civically engaged? Are you voting? Are you donating to something? Time, treasure, or talent? It doesn't just have to be money. Are you finding ways to connect with people on a larger societal level? And I think that leads right into resiliency and coping, is that there's those moments where you just want to say, I'm not okay, and I'm going to sit on my couch and I'm going to watch Netflix. And then when you do feel okay, to go out and say, I'm going to go out and I'm going to go to the protest, or I'm going to go and do something in the community, or I'm going to do this, and just honoring that kind of balance for you and what that looks like. And it will look different for everybody. And so I would just say, always in these conversations, you're just having kind of a genuine, authentic experience for yourself, and honoring what others are going around is something that I think about as we navigate this all as a community, because it can seem overwhelming at times, for sure.
Dill, if it's okay, can I also add to that? Yeah, Chase, I really respect what you're saying tremendously. And I think using your resources is such a valuable part. We talk a lot about using our resources. And you know, we talk a lot about, yes, mental health, but also about, for athletics specifically, high performance, sports psychology. But I think some of those are transferable skills in terms of visualization and imagery and positive self-talk. And how can that be widened for everyone to have those skills? So I think that using your resources is so valuable right now, and I appreciate you saying that. I'd also say, and this is the beauty of just being a gymnastics coach and not having the role that you have, Chase, or that, but you know, what's interesting about campus too, you know, and again, it all depends. What does our hybrid model look like? And what does campus look like in the fall? Is that online? Is that a hybrid? Is that in person? But bringing music and art to campus, I sometimes wonder if that could be, you know, sometimes being, again, as we talked about, in nature, right? And then having the Lamont School of Music put on a performance on the lawn, or having an opportunity for students to paint an area or post, you know, well, you know, things that are going on. And I know we've done that different kinds of ways and shapes and forms, but it would be really interesting. And, you know, I've also, this is for higher education, this is your area of study, Chase, and it's a society thing, so I don't think that's necessarily something we're going to come up with on a Zoom call today or a webinar today, but, you know, how do we provide opportunities for our students to actually fail and be okay? And, you know, what does that look like? And I think that would be, you know, such a great topic for another time too, because, you know, when you fail and you are having to get back up, whether that's academically, whether that's athletically, it does build those skills. And I like with you said, sometimes we're in a society that values so much of achievement and high performance, which we all do. We all have expectations of that. We all want that. But there can be, again, it doesn't have to be black and white. You can achieve and also fail. And you can have high performance and still learn and grow. And so I just really appreciated what you said.
Yeah, I love that. That's the one thing I would say is a silver lining that's come out of this is giving everybody kind of that breathing room to fail, of just saying like, whoops, that didn't work, or that Zoom call was a fail, or you know, that program could be tweaked in that way. And I think everybody's had a little bit more grace with one another to just allow that space for failure and kind of just talking it out and growing. And that's been something that C+V and Anne has really talked about a lot, which I love hearing those conversations with Anne in that way. And so, yeah, I totally echo that, of just being okay with making space for that.
Yes, grace, giving grace to each other and showing up for one another is so important. I've been very impressed just in the spring quarter alone, how the institution, how the department, how, you know, my program, how friends have really shown up for one another and said, hey, are you okay? And I think with the fall, you know, as you two mentioned, it's going to look a lot different, but like, how do we show up for our community? So what do you believe is the role of community resiliency and helping one another cope through tough times? And what is community resiliency, and what does that look like for DU?
God, that's such a great question. And I mean, a great question. And I think that Chase is probably going to have a more educated response to that question. Mine's going to be a little bit more locally, and his is probably going to be a little bit more globally. But I think that's, you know, that's how you get to the community resilience, by having conversations, by talking, by brainstorming ideas, by being open-minded, by taking maybe little baby steps that add up to big things. And so I know, again, more on a local scale and a more one-on-one scale, but you know, gratitude is a big piece to me. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about journaling your feelings, about expressing gratitude, about writing down the things that did go well for you, about, you know, forcing your brain to acknowledge that part of things too. And so I wonder if there's a way, you know, we can collectively do some more positive, and again, genuine and sincere positive work, and not just the, hey, I'm going to put out positive for the sake of positivity, but more gratitude, true gratitude related things. And that, you know, we're all one. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I so love Joseph Campbell. You know, in the end, we are all one, and finding those common connections between us, I think, is a really important thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that's where our Community Plus Values work tries to focus on that idea of building community and a sense of belonging through what we're doing. And so much of what athletics does and everybody across campus is about actively building community and what that looks like. And I think, there's so many thoughts going through my brain right now, that I had a person that I served on a board with named Amber, and she was such a phenomenal leader. She led this group for young folks in Wyoming called Engage, and she mentioned that it's like this metaphor of when people are kind of together in an experience, and you're in a circle together, and people can dip into the middle of the circle and feel protected, and they don't have to do the outside kind of battling or talking or being on there, and they're all facing the outside. And then if someone else needs a respite, they can come into the middle of the circle, and that other person replaces them, and it creates this kind of community feel to it, that you're not alone and that you don't have to be on all the time. And so that's where I think as we think about community is that how do we be there for one another, and ensuring that while we're doing that, that not everybody's experience is the same. And so some people, like, you know, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, those who identify as LGBTQ, those who might are differently abled, all of those pieces that have been more historically marginalized and underrepresented in higher education. How do we, as, you know, white folks, as straight folks, as allies, show up and make sure that we're building community, understanding that there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all approach, and that we have to be willing to kind of learn and grow. And so I think about kind of the self-work of making sure that each of our community members is doing that self-work and really thinking like, how am I showing up in a room? I myself know that I show up as a, you know, outspoken, you know, white male in the room. And so I'm really trying to think about that. And I've had folks hold me accountable, and we've had tough conversations about it. And so I have to think about those things on an individual level and think about, I'm having this experience, what are other people's experiences? And I just value the work of so many at DU that are willing to kind of step out into those spaces and have those tough conversations. And I know that this fall, I acknowledge that not only do we have COVID, the heightened awareness of institutional racism and anti-racism work, but also we're having an election, which will be another layer on all of this, along with saying, are we going to be hybrid, fully in person, you know, some online? And so having those moments of grace for one another, of just saying like, what am I going through? What are other folks going through? How can I just take a step back and listen? And I think that's a big part of resilience is like Melissa said, just listening to one another and really learning lessons from one another and what's going on. And then saying like, okay, I've learned, it was really tough, but my resiliency says, how do I keep moving forward? How do I make sure I'm a better ally? How do I make sure that I'm showing up for folks and being in relationship with people? So I think that's where we can take our community programming, is really thinking about those models and making sure that folks, we utilize the wonderful expertise on DU's campus to be able to create those spaces where people do feel comfortable being in relationship with one another, because it'll build community resilience as we work together on an individual basis.
Chase, I love what you said too. I do think it looks differently for everyone, right? And I think everyone should be given that grace that it's okay that it looks different for them. And I think, you know, we do such a great job at DU, and, you know, we have so many people with such great areas of expertise and involvement and engagement and transparency and leadership. I mean, we really are fortunate to be at the University of Denver, and it's just such an incredible opportunity. And how do we build community service into that is what I would say. Sometimes community service, I also think, is an important part of bringing a community together, building that community resiliency, but maybe in a way that's more meaningful to our students, more accessible, easily able to do, not have to sign up, just show up on the day. Like, there can be ways we can do, I think, continue to enhance the opportunities and ease and engagement of community service type programming that might be. And I also think, when you asked Ilka's a question, it's so good, you know, I also think sometimes we think of things in these big grand gestures, right? Mm-hmm. What if it's just being nice to your fellow neighbor, or you're like the person you happen to be at the grocery store with, or that, you know, it just showing, again, to me, building community resiliency. What if that is just taking the baby steps to be kind to the people who are around you, even if you don't know them, to say hi to, okay, we probably don't want to hold doors open for people right now, but there are other ways to engage in. And I think sometimes we make these grand gestures that we're not doing this or this or this, we're failure, or we're not participating, or we're not engaged. What if it doesn't have to quite be like that either? So I just think some random things to keep in mind.
Yeah, love that.
Melissa, I actually wanted to bounce back to you and just give you the time and space if you wanted to expand a little more. I know that when Chase said that he had a lot on his mind, you nodded in agreement, and I wanted to give you the space to maybe express what you were feeling. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I just want to acknowledge it. Like, I could tell that you do have a lot on your mind, and I want to give you the space to mention that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I have so valued this conversation, and it's so great. Chase, I hope that I get opportunities to hear more of these community and values and webinars and be part of this. Even if I'm not, on this, I'll be looking forward to listening in the future and hearing this. And it's just, even these have been so eye-opening. And I do think, like you said, Dill, there's so much, that we're all processing. And, I tend to think, we use, of course, the word resiliency in our program a lot, but we really also, for some reason, I tend to focus on the word grit. And, I love the Angela Duckworth, it's where perseverance and passion meet. And sometimes I tend to do more of the grit kind of talk than I do the resiliency talk. And I know they're not the exact same, but there's some transferable, kind of characteristics in that. And I just was thinking while Chase was talking, just again, how fortunate and blessed I personally feel that I have had lots and lots and lots of failures. And there have been times that it has been really hard to move on, and there are questions you ask myself, am I good enough? Am I in the right role? Am I doing the right thing? How can, but to realize the sun does come up, and each and every day is a new opportunity to be who you want to be, to learn what you want to learn, to create your own reality, to focus on what matters to you. And so I think those were just some of the random kind of thoughts going through my mind.
Well, thank you so much for...
Sorry, Jill, I wanted to jump in with one quick thing, because you got me thinking, Melissa, that those little moments are so important. And we have this program that Kate Willink and her team at the Vice Provost of Faculty Affairs started as the UROC Awards. And so those are just little moments of saying, you did something that made my day, or you stepped up in this way that maybe it wouldn't be noticed, but, on a grand scale, but that just helped somebody feel like they saw them. And I love what you said about just honoring those little moments together. And what's exciting, C+V is actually working with Kate Willink and her team in advancement and CLE and human resources to actually expand those to the entire community right now. So more to come on that front, but C+V is actually working to do that. And so I think that is such a cool way of saying it, of those grand gestures are awesome, but also it doesn't always have to be this ginormous thing. It can be something that's smaller, and we hope that the UROC Awards will do that. And that's just such a great point.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, I'm going to give voice to some of the questions that have been coming in, but I want to start with one that kind of was backdoor text to me. But what it is what are some signs of the opposite of resilience? What might we see in ourselves or in our colleagues, family members, community members that would signal to us that we need to support them? That's the first piece. And then the second piece was specifically for you, Melissa. How do you know when you're working with a student athlete what they need in that moment? What are the signs that tell you I need to push harder or I need to maybe give space, So if you could kind of give some comments on that, that would be great.
I'll answer your second part, and then I'll let Chase, with his counseling background, give the first part. Since I'm not a counselor or psychologist, I will let Chase. For our team, and I do think there's, again, crossover pieces of things. For our team, I think knowing each person's motivational style is really important. So knowing your athletes, because if you don't really know them, you won't know what is normal, quote unquote. There's no per se such thing as normal, but what's standard behavior for them. So I think knowing what motivates them, knowing their personality, knowing their temperament. So for instance, we do a lot of self-assessments, and they have been fantastic in terms of giving us knowledge about how our athletes handle conflict? How do they handle, are they visual learners? Are they, do they learn in different ways, kinesthetic? And all these self-assessments we've done as far as leadership is concerned, conflict management is concerned, temperament or awareness is concerned, gives us an indication. And obviously we've recruited these athletes. So we've known them prior to them even coming to the University of Denver. So we've built that relationship with them. But you do have to be, it's busy, right? It's really, really busy for all of us, not just student athletes, but student athletes really, they want to represent the University of Denver with such a passion. I mean, they truly want to be, a front door to the university. They want to gain that exposure for the university. They want to be a good spokesman and a good role model for the university. They really are trying hard when they compete to represent their team, our athletic department, but the university. And they do really appreciate their opportunities. And so when they're busy in school and they're busy in gymnastics or any sport, and they're balancing that, sometimes you really have to look, because it can get past you. You can, even as a coach, blow it off and say they're just tired, or it's, they're just balancing this and this. So I really think it's about knowing your athletes, and then, asking the question, how are you doing? And doing it when you have time to be genuine and listen to the answer. And I know that that's hard to do, and I'm not always that great at it. It's easy to say, how are you doing, but then not really listen back. Sure. And to really take that time to be a good listener.
That makes good sense. Right, Chase, what are some of the signs that you
Yeah, I honestly, it totally ties into what you were saying, Melissa, and so much of it does harken back to my days of working with coaches. Is I think about this cool way that it was framed, was that like a thought, feelings, and actions. And so kind of being able to break it down of one thing that I think is a sign of opposite of resilience is when a person is either, I hate using these terms, but I'm going to use them for this because I think it's a good bad paradigm. But when they're either overly positive or overly negative, and so you're not seeing any growth in either direction, I think people always think like, great, they're positive, they're a go-getter, but what's driving that positivity? Does it seem like the positivity is being driven because they're avoiding something? Do they never talk about moments where they're struggling? Do they never talk about moments where they might be feeling anxious or feeling overwhelmed or feeling scared or frustrated? And I think the other piece is like the negativity is that, are they talking about the struggles in a way that there's no sense of kind of honoring that space to say, I'm struggling, I want to just talk it out, but rather you're kind of just living in that and there's nothing coming out of it. And so one thing as a counselor I always did, and someone worked with me when I was going through my counseling as well, is that they're saying, what is something that could come out of this that could help you grow with your anxiety and your depression? And it's so hard because you're like, no, it really stinks. I don't want to feel frustrated. I don't want to feel anxious. But having those moments of finding like this equilibrium of like, there's these moments. So I think there's a sign of that when someone is either overly one way or the other. So I think that's kind of the feeling side to it. And then the thoughts piece, I think there's this sense of, that's very directly tied to feelings, of what are people thinking and voicing out into a meeting? Are they being constantly and deliberately, are they speaking out against something without taking a moment to reflect back and think, how am I feeling? How am I doing? How are the people in the room doing? I think that's a piece of it. And then I think, just like the other thing, there's that other piece of they're only ever checking in with others, but they're never talking about what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And so I think that's a sign of someone who might not be kind of going through the stages of resiliency. And then the other piece is actions, which I think actions are actually the loudest speaking right now during COVID, are when you check in with folks, are they talking about any personal relationships that they have? And it doesn't even have to be a bunch of them, but do they have any sort of support system? Do they talk about feeling constantly alone? Do they feel like they can't cope with things and they're not talking about any moments of success or struggle, but they're just kind of feeling like it's middle of the road? I think that's a big piece of it. And then I do think I harken back to what Melissa said about the why. If you sense that someone is coming in and just doing their job, but they might seem tired or they might seem out of it and they're just kind of going through the motions, I think that is a moment to just check in with that person, because there might be signs of they're not maybe actively not wanting to be resilient, but they just aren't feeling their best selves. And so checking in with them in those moments. And I will say that in these moments, resiliency is so hard because it does feel like it will never end. And so I would encourage you, like Melissa said, to reach out to resources and share those with friends and family around suicide prevention and drug and alcohol and substance abuse. Is there someone that just needs to talk to a telecounselor right now that could use, an online service, something like that, to share resources with people as an action, because I think those are those moments where you don't see people feeling their best selves, and you want to make sure you check in with them, because that could be signs of kind of the opposite of resilience and coping in a way that could really hurt that person and harm that person.
Those are great. They're really concrete ways to think about this. All right, so here's a question from Dong Din, who's also one of our graduate fellows on this project. So thank you for putting this in. So he mentions that in critical frameworks, resilience has been viewed as an issue because of how Black, Indigenous, and people of color have had to be resilient to systems within systems that have historically not supported them or were made for them, right? That they were made for white people. And what are some of the steps that can be taken to address this issue and build community, and also acknowledge that there needs to be some system change, and how the concept of whiteness kind of has this staying power in higher education? As a higher education doctoral student, Chase, do you want to take the first pass at it?
Yeah, yep, no, Dong, thank you so much. You're out there in the virtual world. And that's the one thing, and that's why I always try to acknowledge in the space that I am a white cis male coming to these conversations, because honestly, all of the systems and frameworks and theories have benefited me. And that's where I caution people with resilience, because resilience and these ideas of resilience around it constantly say, like, you should be doing something to find a silver lining, like this all lands on the individual. And it's easy for folks to say that, like myself, because I can dip in and dip out whenever I want, and I'm not directly affected. So I have to honestly battle to be empathic and think, like, wait, how is this affecting other people? And it's a constant struggle that I think particularly white folks and those who are from majority represented people throughout history. And so I love that Don brought up that critical framework of, I love looking at things through different lenses. And so Anna Newman, who's one of my professors at Teachers College, brings up this idea of a house and looking through different windows of that house in order to look through different lenses. And critical frameworks provide us a way to critically ask questions. And this is a perfect question around that, is that resilience is easy to say when you don't feel directly impacted and harmed by the institutional policies and practices and these pieces that have harmed folks of color, Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ, those who are differently abled, and those who just identify with underrepresented groups. And so that's where, when we talk about resilience, I really try to bring in these conversations of how is a person experiencing it who might hold one of these identities versus a person experiencing resilience, quote unquote, who identifies as white. And so I think that it's important to look at it through an institutional lens of resilience, of what can we as an institution learn from what we're doing, realize that we have failed multiple groups and populations, be willing to be transparent, say that as leaders, and then say, how do we authentically bring people into conversation and not tokenize their experiences, but say, hey, we've messed up. We know that not everybody feels a sense of belonging at DU or wherever it is. How can we start to bring healing to this space? And that's where I like to lean on the expertise of folks, but also realize that it's the work of the institution, not of the people of color or those who identify as LGBTQ or those who identify as women. It doesn't land on them, but instead it's bringing them into a conversation of what can we do as an institution or as white folks or as straight folks or anything like that to take on that burden and say, we're going to be allies right now, and we're going to critically look at what we've done, and we're going to change what we're doing. And I love the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, because that's what the author even talks about, is how we attack those policies. And so I think that's a big thing for me as I think about this work. And Dong, I just appreciate you bringing that in, because I think it's such an important part, and it's something that we just constantly have to check ourselves as those who identify as white and straight and cis and with other privileged identities.
Yeah. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Melissa, do you want to add one or two thoughts there?
No, I would just say that I thought that was a phenomenal question as well. And it's funny, I really like Ibram Zandy, and he has a great podcast with Brene Brown. And so I just think, again, it's such an education point. It is not the same for everyone. And we have to recognize where the failures are and where we can improve from a institution, a community, a state, a nation. And so I think part of that is the education piece. And I know we have a lot of diversity on our own gymnastics team, and then being open-minded to asking the questions and hearing the answers and responses.
Important. Thank you all so much. I think what I love about this conversation is there's been some philosophical and heart-led pieces. There's also a lot of practicality in what you've said. And so I certainly am walking away with some ideas of things that I need to look for in myself, my colleagues, and then ways that maybe we can continue to do this work through C+V. I invite everybody who's on to send us ideas of other experts that we have in our community. We really want to just continue to kind of mine the expertise that we have internally and topics that resonate with you that that you want us to bring to life for you, because we would love to do all of that. I want to mention, because we talked about some tough topics today a little bit, is that on the COVID-19 page, there are all kinds of resources that are listed for, hotlines and any kind of counseling help that you might need, and that we have a tab for that also on our C+V website. So with that, thank you, Dill, so much for just practicing your craft with us in journalism. And Chase, thank you so much for wearing this other hat. And Melissa, thank you so much for not being a mom of twins, but I don't know how I came up with that. I literally, I know that you and Todd and I talked with my husband Mark at a party once, and we walked away, we were like, oh, they're really great parents. So I somehow thought you were twin parents, but
No
anyway, thank you so much for being here, and thanks for all that you're doing and the leadership that you place, and then also the leaders that you put out into our community through your student athletes, because I think it makes a difference well beyond gymnastics. So thank you so much, and everybody have a great weekend, and take care of yourselves.